Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burly-ites. I'll get right to it. We're recording this one early on Good Friday, and I don't want to keep our gracious guest here for any longer than necessary. David MacNaughton, former ambassador to the United States, joins us for a timely conversation on Canada-U.S. relations. A brief bio to start. Mr. MacNaughton is currently the president of Palantir Technologies Canada and was formerly the chair of StrategyCorp and principal secretary to the Premier of Ontario. He served as Canada's ambassador to the United States from March 16th to August 2019, getting a close-up view of President Trump in his first term. I'm going to carry on with the intro, David, but I want to stop and say something left out of your bio is that you effectively founded the public relations industry, GR industry in Canada, with your first company, Public Affairs International. And Alan Gregg was part of it. And Alan Gregg has been writing a serialized memoir. I don't know if you've been reading it. Have you been reading it?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I was going to ask you if it was remotely accurate, because you're in it a fair bit. So,
oh God.
Yes,
well, Alan was a great business partner. He was terrific.
Yeah. All right. So you have a rare and expert perspective, and that's precisely where I want to go with this over the next hour. Mr. MacNaughton's been in the room with Trump during trade negotiations. I want to get into some detail about what those negotiations are actually about, what industries are affected. Canada talks about being strong. How does that manifest itself? In Mr. MacNaughton's experience, what tactics are likely to work with President Trump and what do not? Lots more. David, really appreciate you making the time to be with us today.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So, are you surprised at where we're at with the United States?
Well, everything is a bit surprising with Donald Trump. There's no predictability and everything else. I anticipated that it would be more difficult this time than even last time, but it has been chaotic, to put it mildly, and he's been striking out in all different directions, and he's sort of been unencumbered by, in the first go round, Trump won. He had a really, really strong group of advisors around in the White House, most of the cabinet secretaries, and they were able to, I think, influence him by restraining some of his instincts. But now he's got mostly sycophants who are, telling him what he wants to hear, and people like Peter Navarro whispering in his ear and all this kind of stuff. So it's much more challenging this time than it was last time.
You leaned on, it seemed, as I recall, you not you personally, but the whole effort leaned on Kushner and Ivanka a fair bit in the first term. Where are they this time? What role did they play, and where are they?
I don't know. I don't know for sure, but clearly they haven't been visible. And from everything I know, they haven't been playing a role at all. Jared was very helpful, not on a continuous basis, but whenever we needed him to get messages to the president or calm him down or give him another side of the equation or whatever. He was always very responsive. He was very helpful at the end in the negotiations over the Kuzma deal. Very, very much involved in the last few days.
Did you have a sense at the time that Trump was unhappy with the deal, or did you think it was going to endure?
It was the best deal ever. I think he obviously, said it was a great deal and everything else. He had a real pro, leading the negotiations in Bob Lighthizer. And Bob's not exactly what I'd call a free trader. I mean, the first time I met him, he said to me, he said, "You got to know that I think the NAFTA deal is the second worst deal that the United States has ever negotiated." And I said, "Oh, really? Well, what's the worst one?" He said, "The Canada-U.S. auto pact." So you kind of knew where he was coming from, and he was a great.
But he might have said the Marshall Plan.
Yeah. that too. But no, but he was also really, really focused on China. But he's not a free trader by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a pro, you know.
Yeah. Um, did the did any of the territorial stuff come up in those negotiations back in the first term? Did Trump ever mention 51st state? Did he ever imply that he thought that Canada would make more sense inside the United States?
Certainly never when I was around. I never heard it. Never, there was none of this kind of, you know, 51st state or governor stuff came up.
Hmm.
That's been a more recent development, I think.
And what about the economic theory that I guess would be one hypothesis of what he's doing, which is this desire to repatriate manufacturing to the United States and change the global trading order so that the United States sells products rather than imports products, and can finance the government off of tariffs. All this kind of economic theory, was that around at all?
Yeah, I mean, the first meeting I had with Trump, where the Prime Minister was there, and Chrystia Freeland and Katie Telford, and we were sitting there, and the Prime Minister raised the softwood lumber issue, and so Trump turned to Wilbur Ross and said, "So Wilbur, where are we on all this softwood stuff?" And so Ross described it. And as usual, he said, "Well, the Canadians subsidize their timber," and I said, "No, that's not true. I mean, we've won, X number of cases and all those kinds of." Anyway, so Trump says, "Oh, no, no, whatever." He said, "Where are we?" And so Ross says, "Well, we've got tariffs in place, but we're trying to negotiate a quota arrangement." And Trump sort of paused for a minute, and he said, "Well, I don't like quotas. They tend to drive prices up. I'd rather have tariffs." And um, what are you going to say at that point?
Right.
But his position on tariffs has been remarkably consistent. It's one of the few things that he's been consistent on is that tariffs. He loves the word tariff. It's one of his most favorite words in the English language, and he does believe, notwithstanding all the evidence to the contrary, that you can, raise money, that the country that's sending the goods in is actually paying the tariffs, not the U.S. consumer. And he hasn't changed his position on that at all.
No, no. That exchange you described between Trudeau and Trump sounds relatively normal and civil. Um, when did Trump come to dislike Trudeau?
Mostly when we had the G7 thing, when after the meeting, and Trump was headed, I think he was going to meet, he was either meeting the Chinese or the Koreans or whatever, and the Prime Minister held a press conference and talked about not being bullied. It wasn't something that he hadn't said before, but Trump saw it as being, a personal insult to him and all this kind of stuff. And that's when he went crazy and, you know, sick Navarro and, the White House economic advisor on Trudeau. And I think that was really a turning point. I mean, up until then, in all the meetings I was in, it was pretty not only civil, it was kind of lighthearted and chummy, if anything. But that was a turning point. Uh,
So why would Trudeau have broken that up? I mean, it seems like if you can glean anything about Trump, it's how much it matters whether he likes you or not.
yeah, I think. Well, I think you know at the time, and this is what you got to really be careful about. Is I think Trudeau was playing to Canadians and to the Canadian media and all this kind of stuff. He was front and center of the G7. And his defense afterwards was it wasn't something that he hadn't said before. Well, that may well be true, but you don't say he never said it before in front of the world media. And Trump obviously, you know, didn't take it well, shall we say.
The word artificial rarely shows up as a strong argument in matters of environmental sustainability. That's a rule you can pretty much count on. The exception to that rule unwinds here over the next 90 seconds as I tell you about a new initiative from our presenting sponsor, Telus. It's their sovereign AI factory, launching this summer. Clearly, there's a broad set of benefits with this, but the factory has a particular focus on sustainability. I'll drill down on that after the basic details. In essence, this is Canada building its own high tech infrastructure specifically for AI, cementing the tools and talent to advance our tech future and massively benefit the economy. Think of it as the cornerstone for our own Silicon Valley. The first factory will open in Rimouski, Quebec, followed by a planned expansion to a second facility in BC. They'll be powered by NVIDIA's latest supercomputers and run on Telus' high-speed, low-latency fiber networks. Faster, better, smarter technology that not only supercharges our businesses and research projects, it also keeps all the data, innovation, and computing power right here in Canada, ensuring our technological sovereignty. But I promised you a sustainability story, folks, and here it is. These AI factories are specifically engineered for efficiency. Powered by 99% renewable energy and strategically designed for natural cooling, they cut water consumption by over 75% compared to most data centers. They're also 3 times more energy efficient for excess power usage, using significantly less electricity to power those intense AI computing workloads. And maybe the most exciting thing, there's all kinds of potential for putting the AI to work to make things even more eco friendly, developing new solutions for our environmental challenges, and supporting Canadian businesses as they move forward with sustainable technologies in a very real, very practical way. There's nothing artificial about that. So then what do you take of and I'm not trying to draw you into politics, David. What do you take of the way Carney has described the relationship publicly and described Trump publicly when he says the relationship we've had with the United States is over, steadily integrating our economy and our defense, those days are gone. The United States has walked away from that. We have to find a new path. How does Trump react to that, do you think?
Well, I don't know specifically. I mean,
I
I
know you
think,
don't, but yeah.
yeah, obviously,
Those
what
are
is
stark
going to,
things to say.
yeah, yeah. But I think the reality of life is that the United States is in a different space now, and our relationship with them is going to be different on a going forward basis than it has been in the past. And I think, what I think what people don't really realize, I don't think, is that this mood of protectionism and isolationism was growing in the United States before Donald Trump became president. I think what Trump has is he's got a great instinct for tapping into, a mood. It has nothing to do with political philosophy or anything else. I mean, he was a Democrat for most of his adult life and all this kind of stuff. But he sensed that isolationism, protectionism. He glommed onto it, and then he was able to amplify it also. So what might have taken 10 years for the United States to get into the position that they're in at the present moment, he whipped up that mood, that mentality, and all at the same time when, as we've seen throughout the democratic world, um, combination of things, including social media, has driven, people further to the different poles and eroded the center. And so, as I say, he tapped into a mood that was existing in the United States, and then he amplified it. And I think to that degree, we have to be realistic in the sense of saying this isn't just Donald Trump. This is also a mood that exists in the United States, and we better take that into consideration. And I don't know your experience, but we have lots of American friends who, I have to bite my tongue frequently because they buy into a lot of this. They don't like some of the things that Trump does, but they buy into a lot of this stuff about America getting ripped off and all this kind of thing. And so, it's something to be. It's not just Donald Trump, you know.
They designed the whole world to be their farm system,
Yeah.
right? And now they're complaining about it.
Well, and it's interesting in the sense of, when you look at the whole migration issue, um, in 2015, the last year before, Donald Trump was elected, there were more Mexicans who left the United States to go to Mexico than the other way around. And the reason for that was prosperity in Mexico. And you alluded to the Marshall Plan. I mean, it was a deliberate thing to try to get Europe back on its feet so that we wouldn't have another war, and that also they would be consumers that would buy American goods. And the reality is that if you really wanted to permanently do something about migration from Mexico and Central America, you'd do a continental Marshall Plan to raise the level of prosperity of those people so they wouldn't feel the need to try and come to America. But that's not, you'd never get that. That'd never get through Congress, quite apart from Donald Trump.
Right. It isn't just protectionism we're seeing with them, though, David, right? It's also isolationism
Yeah.
and a change of their perception of their change in what role they want to play in the world. But to go to your point about things being in train before Trump, I had a political scientist named Jennifer Welsh from McGill, whom I really respect on, and she was saying that a lot of this stuff that's happening in terms of the world order would have been happening anyway too without Trump. And he's accelerating it and he's making it more chaotic than it would need to be. But the United States is withdrawing, she said, out of necessity. It can't play that role anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think it's partly that. I mean, obviously, when you look at what happened in, Iraq and Afghanistan and the draining of both human and financial resources and everything else, and the world's policemen. I mean, it isn't sustainable. And in addition to that, if you look at the institutions that were created after the Second World War, multilateral institutions that were supposed to, protect, to increase our prosperity and protect our peace, most of them are dysfunctional. We allowed the China into the WTO in 2001 with the
Mistake?
expectation that they were going to play by the rules, and they
Yeah.
didn't.
Right. So it was a mistake to let them in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Or once they didn't play by the rules, kick them out, right?
Right. Mm.
But the reality is that so the United States really basically doesn't pay any attention to the WTO. Obviously, the United Nations has become a dysfunctional organization. I mean, all of the multilateral institutions are, just not functional at all. And nobody knows what the new world order is going to be.
Do you have a guess? Is it spheres of influence? Because I'm trying to figure out where Canada, like there's all this talk in Canada now, and you saw it in the leaders' debate last night. What do we do in this new world and new trading partners and new alliances and all this kind of stuff? But my God, I've lived my entire life under the comfortable protection of the United States of America. And it's a little unnerving to me now to think that we don't have the United States and we have to rely on France and Italy.
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a couple of things. One of them is I think that what the most recent Trump activities have done is it's caused Canada to kind of all of a sudden waken up out of our lethargy and comfort zone and all this kind of stuff. And it's about time. I think we've been coasting for too long. And I think that hopefully with the degree of patriotism and nationalism and the reality that the status quo is just not going to work, that we do take some actions that are going to change what we've been doing for a while, and hopefully, create a whole new prosperity in Canada. I don't think it's realistic to say, we're going to get away from the U.S. market, or, hopefully we can find some way of establishing a continued mutual defense and security position, that we don't have to arm ourselves against our southern neighbor. But I think one thing that we do need to do is to actually take the defense and security of our nation more seriously, because the threats are coming from multiple sources, and they're not just intercontinental ballistic missiles coming over the Arctic. There's cybersecurity. It's, all sorts of things. So as I say, hopefully this jolts us into doing some things that we should have been doing for a long, long time and have just been resting on our laurels.
So one of the obvious things people talk about, David, is the North, that it should be our job to defend the North. Can we afford to defend the North?
Well, I don't think we can afford not to. And I think that the question really becomes, and this is where I don't know, you know, I'm not uh, I'm not completely up to date in terms of what modern technology is, but it isn't just, it may be some icebreakers and it may be some fighter jets, but it's
Nuclear
also,
subs?
yeah, it's also nuclear stuff. It could, but it's also drones, and it's also, technology. I mean, if you look at what I think, the Russians assumed that they were going to be able to go into Ukraine and just, win in a week. And all of a sudden, with all of the new technology, it wasn't just the determination of the Ukrainians, which was part of it, but it was also, it's different fighting wars now than it used to be. It's not just tanks and, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. It's a different game. And so, but look, we have to step up our defense and security spending, with no question about it. And hopefully, we can do it in a way which is, rather than, you know, go through 42 different procurement processes that last 15 years, and then, you know,
Should we buy
cheap.
the F-35?
Yeah, I mean, look, if we can work out a lasting uh, defense and security agreement with the United States, which includes the acknowledgement that we are a sovereign country in a very serious way, and also that they are not going to use things like 232 and IEPA to put tariffs on us. I mean, we're either a trusted defense and security partner, or we're not. And you know that's actually where I would go. I would not try to engage with the United States on a trade discussion right now. We have a trade agreement. What I would do is have a serious defense and security discussion with them, where we say, are we going to be partners, or are we going to be adversaries? And we're prepared to spend money either way. Up to you what you want to do. And if we are partners, then none of this nonsense about steel and aluminum being a national security threat to the United States. It just doesn't happen. It's not, you can't do that.
So, I assume we all started breathing again last week, and then stopped, and then started again. Some of us have stopped watching the news. It's like a game of respiratory whack-a-mole. Our sponsor, CN, counsels a calm, data-informed, judicious response. And nobody understands trade better than CN. Simply stated, just about everything that travels inside Canada or abroad travels by train. Trains are the most efficient way to move cargo over land, period. Which is why, if we're being honest, our trading future is and will remain closely interlocked with the United States. As I said last week, Canada has cards, and some of them are, well, trump cards. Crude oil, potash for fertilizer, uranium, electricity, some of the best lumber on earth. American farmers, manufacturers, and retailers remain by far the biggest customers for all of that. It's impossible to overstate the importance of the Canadian and American markets to one another. Any real structural change would be transgenerational, if possible at all. It may be hard to keep that in mind amid all the sturm and drang of recent weeks, but we will get through this because we must. It's true we could be smarter, though. Canada could make its tax system more attractive to investor capital. It could pare and thin the jungle of regulations companies have to cope with. Governments must allow expert trade enablers like CN to do what they do best if Canada is to operate at full potential. These are interesting times, as the old curse famously puts it. They should focus the mind. So, Carney has left this tantalizing idea out there that when he and Trump spoke, they agreed that after the election in May, the election on April 28th, in May, the new prime minister, whoever that was, would sit down with the president and the United States and negotiate a comprehensive economic and security arrangement. That sounds like a massive undertaking. And I don't really know how you would do it with this administration because it seems that there's nobody usefully to work with in the administration other than the president. But nonetheless, it seems like the big show. What do you anticipate out of that? How might that go down?
Well, I think the first thing you got to realize is if you're going to go into that kind of a discussion, um, what Trump is going to be looking for at the end of it is the ability to say, I won. I've been trying to get them to do this forever, and I finally got them to do it, and I won, and they lost. And then be able to say to other countries, see, if you actually want something done, you got to do what I want you to do, right? I, I would not, I would not have a discussion with Donald Trump in May or June or July or anything else about trade until there was an agreement that they were not going to use, Canada as a national security threat to impose tariffs on steel, aluminum, or any other goods, which is what he's doing. He's using IEEPA and he's using 232. And so we can't have a reasonable discussion until they agree that they're not going to do that. And that means you have to have a defense and security negotiation with them that precedes any discussion about trade. And I would put it simply, I'd just say, look, let's have a defense and security discussion. We're prepared to step up to the plate, but you got to stop all these security, threats about our sovereignty, and you got to stop imposing tariffs under the guise that we're a national security threat. Let's have a discussion about that. How do we resolve that? And oh, by the way, there is in our trade agreement a clause which says we can review that in 2026, and I'm ready to do that in 2026. But those people today who are saying we should right away go down and engage in a trade negotiation with Donald Trump right now, I think that's just madness. It just doesn't make any sense at all. For one thing, because any of the cards that we would play in that discussion would have a disproportionate effect on one part of our country or the other part of our country. And the last thing we need to do right now is to divide the unity that we have, even though it's got some, some fractures and some stresses in it. We need to maintain
a remarkable time in Canada.
It is. It's phenomenal. I haven't seen this degree of patriotism in my lifetime. I'm sure it happened in the Second World War, but right now, and so,
I've never seen it involve Quebec the way it involves Quebec.
No, precisely. Well, and when I met with the premiers, Premier Ford asked me to go and talk to them before Christmas, and I did and met with them all, and a number of them said, well, what we need to do is to, go and advance the 2026 discussions to now and everything else because there's uncertainty in the business community. And I said, no, can't do that. Well, why? I said, well, okay. First thing on the table is supply management. How about that? Oh no, you can't do that. Well, everybody wants to have somebody else's thing on the table. Well, let's put oil on the table. Well, Danielle Smith says no. Well, let's put potash on the no, no. So I think the discussion really has to be around sovereignty, defense, and security. And if we can get an agreement on that, and I think that there's a possibility that we could, because you know, Trump Trump's got to be feeling a little bit nervous at the present moment with all of the things that are happening. And, I think he would like to get a deal with somebody that he can point to and then say, see, there was method in my madness. And if you want to come to the table and negotiate with me, you can.
So are you operating on the assumption it is possible to get back to non-tariffed trade between Canada and the United States?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
in this administration. So you
Yeah.
you you haven't given up hope on getting all these tariffs removed.
No, I have not. I
So
have
what
not.
would that do to his economic thesis, though?
Well, I think what it does to his economic thesis is to say there are there are you know good people and bad people. I mean, he started off his whole thesis on this is reciprocity. We're going to have
Right.
reciprocal tariffs. Well, okay. Well, we don't have any tariffs on you. You don't have any tariffs on us. And if somebody else wants to behave that way, then that's fine too. Um, you can't think that somehow or other there is some deep strategy in whatever Donald Trump does. It is very much, in the moment, what's being reported in Fox or Newsmax or whatever, and what people are saying and who's spoken to him last and all this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, in the meantime, in the absence of, you know, people like Lighthizer being advising him, he's got Navarro chirping in his ear about the nonsense that Navarro's been spewing I mean, I met with Navarro right after Trump was elected. So, I mean, I know that it hasn't changed, but the difference is that he's actually sitting in the White House advising the president, and there isn't anybody sort of pushing back.
Can I ask you just a diversion? What's he like? Like if I had a dinner party and he joined it, would I enjoy that?
He can be charming, no question about that. Um, but, I guess it depends on whether he thinks you're um, important enough to be his charming self, or whether he's going to be belligerent. I mean, look, there's lots of people that I know who spend a lot of time with him who think he's great and enjoy his company, and he enjoys theirs and everything else because it's not an adversarial kind of thing. So.
Well, I've always been kind of struck by the fact that there must be some sort of normal person in there because up until he ran for president, he was perfectly acceptable in all the polite circles of New York City, right?
Yeah, well, as long as you hadn't done work for him and he owed you money, it was okay.
You're right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was in Atlantic City one time, and boy, did I hear stories.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and you hear them in New York about their real estate deals and everything too. But look, I mean, the guy, you gotta, he has
Smart.
he's he's clever. He's not intellectually curious, but he's clever. And as I say, when you look at his intuition, this sort of tapping into this mood in the United States and then amplifying it for his own electoral purposes. Like when I was down there, notwithstanding the fact that there was a fairly substantial group in the Congress that were isolationist and protectionist, by far and away, certainly in the Republican Party, they were very much still free traders,
Right.
and free marketers, and even in the Democratic Party, there was a caucus that was very much, in sync with all of that too. That's substantially changed. I mean, when I hear, you know, what some of the people say now about tariffs and all this kind of stuff, that it's a totally different story than what they were saying when I was there. Um,
So we don't have the allies we used to have. So in the first go around, you coordinated a massive charm offensive. I know I was working with Kathleen Wynne at the time, and she had a list of people she was to call and meet with. And everybody in the country that had any connections had a similar thing going on. And you basically encircled him with Americans who were telling him to do this deal with us,
yeah.
right? That doesn't seem like that can be constructed this time.
Well, I think it can. It's just going to take time. I mean, I think what you've got right now is you've got uh, you know, the business community afraid to speak up because, if you look at what's happened to universities and law firms and anybody who's seen to be not on side, I mean,
Americans are afraid of their government, David. Can you believe
yeah,
that?
yeah, unbelievable, right? And of course, in the Congress, they're afraid, the Republicans are afraid of being primaried or whatever. As we get closer to the midterms, and if in fact the economy, goes down, if inflation increases and everything else, I think there'll be pressure. There'll be different set of pressures, and I think I mean, I think you're already starting to see some businesses push back in the United States. I mean, the whole auto industry, because of the interrelationship between, the North American integration of the economy. It's hard to actually say, well, that's an American car and that's not an American car and everything else because of all of the parts that move back and forth and everything else. So, he's starting to get some pushback, but I think that's only going to increase over time. Now, it's kind of it's really perverse to kind of think, well, I hope there's a real economic downturn because then he's going to be under pressure to do something. I mean, but I think the reality is we may have to suffer through some both uncertainty and negative economic consequences until we get back to, we're not going to get back to the same as we were before, but there will at least be some framework within which we can have a rational discussion rather than this kind of, oh, what are you going to do about fentanyl? Really? I mean, seriously, is that really what you want to talk about? Um, so we'll see.
Have you ever just needed a fresh start? That's exactly what Siaya, a young Inuit woman, is looking for in Netflix's new comedy series North of North. From one of the most remote communities in the world comes a universally relatable and heartwarming comedy about one underdog's journey to reinvent herself. But it's not going to be easy when everyone in her small town knows her business. North of North, Netflix's first Canadian series co produced with CBC in partnership with APTN, now playing on Netflix in Canada and around the world. So I'm interested, David. You sound like you think we can cut a defense deal with them, a security deal. And you've said you think we can get the tariffs off, but you have also said that you think the relationship is not going to be the same going forward as it has been in the past. So in what ways will it be different if we're in a security arrangement and we are in a free trade zone? How will the relationship be different?
Well, I think I think it's going to be different because we as a country need to um, diversify our relationships and our interests, both economic and political. And so, no, we can't rely on the French and the Italians or whatever to come to our defense. But I think that, we do need to think about um, the strengths that this country has, and let's get our natural gas to Asia to reduce the use of coal. I mean, that's not an anti-environment thing. That's actually a pro-environment thing. Let's make sure that we actually, develop the relationships that, we've been talking about for many, many years. Let's get our stuff to market rather than going through endless approval processes. Let's get government to focus on outcomes rather than process. I mean, there are a whole series of things that, Canada, Trump's not wrong in the sense of saying, Canada's totally dependent on the United States right now. When we can't be in that position, we can't be that vulnerable. We have to actually be stronger as a country, because if we're stronger as a country, that will make our relationship with the United States a more balanced one rather than a subservient, if you want to call it that.
Certainly seems like we've had a climate policy that sacrificed the good in search of the perfect, eh?
Oh, totally. Totally. Well, it's funny. I was at a cabinet meeting when I was ambassador, and one of the policy advisors uh, was going on and on and on about how you could get off of coal if you just had political leadership and just as we had in Ontario when we got off of coal, and it was just because of political leadership and courage. And I happen to know that that particular advisor had been a member of Greenpeace and had been very, very actively opposing nuclear power. And I said, oh, yeah, yeah, that took real political leadership. It also took 50% of our baseload power in Ontario being generated from nuclear power. You remember nuclear power, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, and we've seen examples of this,
And that
not
was
just,
at a time when the federal government wasn't even mentioning nuclear power.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. But you look at what happened in Germany when the Greens decided that they were going to close all their nuclear power, and we're going to import natural gas from Russia,
Yeah.
which gave Putin both the revenue to rearm and made Germany completely dependent on Russia. So this environmental stuff, and also, you look at a province like New Brunswick that banned fracking, and New Brunswick actually has natural gas reserves. But they banned fracking, so you can't get the natural gas out of the ground. So they import natural gas from Pennsylvania. How do the Pennsylvanians get it out of the ground?
They frack it.
Frack it. So let's stop, being silly about. I'm not a climate denier or anything like that, but the reality is, in fact, we can use some of our resources to improve global emissions because it isn't actually a Canadian problem last I looked. I mean, it is actually a global problem. So
Right.
let's stop, being silly.
Right. Okay. So back to the Trump administration. Um, what do you think explains the chaos around the tariffs on, off, these things, those things, these countries, not those countries, all that kind of stuff? I'll just preempt your answer by saying it's difficult for me not to see a massive grifting operation there. I mean, the potential for insider trading when you are shifting those kinds of things around whimsically like that is enormous.
Yeah, I don't want to attribute motives or suggest bad activity because I don't know. Certainly the potential exists, no question about that. But I think most of it is that um, a lot of, whether it be the Commerce Secretary or the Treasury Secretary, and the only person who has been steeped in, trade policy, who's in the administration, is actually the U.S. Trade Representative, Jason Greer, who is Bob Lighthizer chief of staff. And Jason, a sensible guy who kind of understands what's going on. But he was going through, being confirmed in the Senate and everything else. And meanwhile, you've got Navarro as I say, sitting beside the president and Lutnick and Bissett, either going through confirmation themselves or just getting into their portfolios. And I think the reality is that they, they've been trying to please the president, but also getting up the learning curve just in terms of how complex those things are. I mean, I had not realized the complexity of the trading relationship just between Canada and the United States until we got into the whole NAFTA renegotiation. And you just kind of understand, like, it really, you can mess up things very quickly by doing very small things that sort of appear benign, but
Yeah.
actually have huge impacts. And if you think about that on a global basis, it's and the president tends not to want to get into complex details. It's tariffs are good.
But how is the place running, David? Jesus. I mean, you and I have seen a lot of governments, some of them very bad, okay? But nothing like this. Like Lutnick appears to have no more idea what Trump is going to do than I do. I don't know how that
Yeah.
works.
No, neither do I. But I think again, there's a certain element of it that is going to remain the same. And in other words, Trump is going to be Trump. But I think as time goes on and the voices, the business community voices who are being directly impacted as we get closer to the midterms, Congress people who are up for reelection, who are getting, stuff, there'll be some other pressures. And I think those, we had, I, I got a call one time when I was in Washington from a senior person in the White House who said, I want to tell you, the president's going to announce tariffs on steel aluminum from Canada tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. And I know the head of the steel workers and some business executives here, and can you see what you can do? Oh, okay. Right. So anyway, I phoned Leo Gerard and I phoned a bunch of these steel guys and everything else. So the next morning, quarter to 11, same guy from the White House phones me and he says, man, I don't know what you did, but apparently the thing, he's not announcing tariffs. He's just going to announce, it's just going to be a photo op. And I said, well, what are you doing talking to me? You should be standing beside him because you never, you never know.
What he's going to say.
Well, of course, at quarter after 11, the tariffs were announced because the guy wasn't, where he should have been. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a certain element, but you think back to who was in the room in the first go around, both on the security and the defense side and on the economic policy side and everything. It was a pretty awesome, competent team. And I think that they were, there were certain sort of guardrails and then, added to, people like Rob Portman, who was in the Senate, who, was a former U.S. trade representative. And, so there was a different circumstance. Um,
Right.
but as I say, I think as time goes on, we're going to see some moderation and, what we need to do is to be prepared to do what's best for Canada when there's an opening, and whether that opening is right after our election or whether it's in August or whether it's next December, I don't know the answer to that. You have to be ready though.
Maybe I'd like to close with this, David. Where do you see the United States going? Is Trump an aberration or a harbinger? Um, and is the culture of the place changing in a way that its international behavior will change to reflect it? Or is this a guy who's imposed his will temporarily on a group of people?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I think you're seeing, a fundamental change. It's going to be hard for the US to get, even if they wanted to get back to where they were, because I think there's going to be a suspicion by, other countries, by investors, by others, that all the things that we learned in school and since the Second World War about the United States, about the rule of law, about the checks and balances and everything else, it's kind of, oh, no, not necessarily so. Now, the only thing I will say is that this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon. I mean, we're seeing it elsewhere. There's places like Hungary and the many, many sort of democratic countries that are shifting, and we can't control that. The United States there's still gonna be an extraordinarily wealthy and powerful nation, and they're our neighbor. And what we need to do as a country, and I'm really quite optimistic about this. I really am. I think this is sort of wakened Canada up, and I hope we take advantage of it and to fulfill the potential that we have as a country. And when I first, as a 23-year-old, went to Ottawa to work in a minister's office, and I remember he used to give these speeches all the time. And that is a long time ago. I won't even say how long ago it was, but
Don Jameson.
That's right. And he used to say, if you list all of the problems that we have as a country, and then you take any other country in the world and you list all of their problems, and you said, I'd like to trade their problems for our problems, and the answer you'd come up with is, no, I wouldn't. And I think what we need to do at this point in our history is not just even to list those problems, but to list all those opportunities and to say, how are we going to capitalize on those opportunities rather than wring our hands about our problems? And that includes our relationship with the United States.
Great. It's a great note on which to end. It's an opportunity if we see it that way. And certainly the cohesion in the country allows us to do some things maybe we couldn't consider
Yeah.
a little while ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's hard to, I'm sure if you're sitting, as an employee or an executive in a automobile company in Oshawa or Windsor or whatever, thinking about seeing this as an opportunity would be hard right now.
Right.
But I think generally speaking, it is, and we need to see it that way, because if we don't, then it will become a bigger and bigger problem. So.
Right. Thanks for joining me, David. We've been friends for a long time. It's great to see you and see you looking so well. You look terrific.
Well, feel good, and I'm back to playing a little golf every once in a while. Well, it's too damn cold here right now to play golf, but I'm feeling great.
All right, go read Alan Gregg's things, though. Make sure you haven't been defamed.
All right, I will.
All right, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, CN Rail, and Netflix Canada, and most importantly, David MacNaughton. Thanks very much. All your Herle Burly-ites will be back next week. Look forward to seeing you then.